Healing starts when we tell the truth about what incarceration does to the mind, the family, and the spirit. Accountability is not about shame. It is about ownership, repair, and choosing a different future. Coming home requires more than release papers. People need identity, wellness, mentorship, and structure. Restorative leadership means we do not just survive the system. We rebuild lives, families, and communities. This is Life Switch Conversations. Real voices, real healing, real second chances.
Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of Life Switch Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Derron Simon, and today I'm beyond excited, right? Because I got a brother on this show that I met through LinkedIn, and shout out to LinkedIn because LinkedIn really is where great minds can connect. I don't know of another platform that I have seen that, of course, I'm new in this, but is at a level where if we all in reentry, I can almost pick and choose who's really doing it, who's really doing big things, who really has the mindset, who's really had the lived experience, who really is at that level. And so shout out to LinkedIn for providing that platform. And that's how I met this brother here. Brother Alejo Rodriguez he's on another level, man. And the things he's doing, his legal work, his mastery work, his academic discipline work, his foundational work, his thinking. It is so exciting because I got to be honest with y'all. I feel like, and no joke. I mean, no capping, Alejo. I feel like I was back in the 60s and I'm talking to like a James Baldwin or one of those intellectual minds that are like, boom, 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 take it to this level. Not just rah-rah or, we got a revolution change. We got to tear the walls down. No, I mean, this guy is coming with the intellectual sophistication that, as a physician I am and have been for years. Of course, I don't practice anymore, but this is what stimulated me and many of us, certainly me, I could say, in the healthcare field. So it was nice to meet surgeons that would talk about things that were above the top in procedures or applications or diagnostic ways to improve upon your crafts. It is so nice to have you here today because we are going to improve upon our craft in the reentry space because of you. So this is what this show is going to offer. So I'm so excited. Ladies and gentlemen, meet my friend Alejo Rodriguez. And, Rodriguez, Alejo, you like Alejo? Is that cool?
Alejo works, man.
Alejo, okay. Man, we about to just jump right in, man. We're going to jump right in, and you can talk about what you do as we answer the questions. But my first question to start the show is this, man. Before we talk about justice, let's start with a bigger question, okay? What made you decide that simply changing laws wasn't enough? That we also have to change the way communities participate in creating justice? What made you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, brother, man, for just having me on the show. I so appreciate it. You mentioned in LinkedIn, and that's, I want to get that shout out too, because we have been able to connect, on the work and the sharing the ideas. So thank you just for the invitation and to be here and to, just connect with your audience. And as far as I'm concerned, we're all going to learn from this process right now. Hopefully, going to better our skills across the board. It's not just one-sided, man. It's about the engagement. I'm like that as a person. I like to believe that, I want to be engaged in the conversation and not just be told about what's going on or just solely being informed. Like I like to be able to engage with the ideas and taking things apart. And I think that's, a part of the root of, this idea of when you think about justice or think about the laws and why there needs to be more participatory action around, or more community involvement in making it that way. How we can inform laws has always kind of been embedded, even though it hasn't always embedded in me, even though it always hasn't been on that same clear explanation. Like I never have always thought about it through the lens of the law specific. I've thought about in terms of different programs at first and then different type of policies that affect us directly. And so the idea of how we engage with the law is just an iteration of it.
It's totally awesome. Yeah, and I can't wait for you to break that down.
And I don't want to neglect, I want to be very, very clear, right? It also came from my life experiences, been going through these, several institutional failures, in prison being part of that. So also having this opportunity from seeing this both from the outside and the inside and what really lands. Like I've been in programs where people just sit around and they're just there for the certificate. Ain't nobody benefiting from nothing, and they're just filling in space, and people are getting millions for these programs, right?
That's
People
true.
also getting paid for this. So that kind of awareness is made me think, well, it's got to be more than just the law that's going to save us, right? There's work that we need to do with us in order to get our stuff together.
Your organization is called Participatory Justice Associates, right?
Yeah.
Participatory. There you go. I don't think participatory justice is a phrase most Americans hear every day, right? What does that actually mean, and why does that distinction matter?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a consultancy that I offer, and we'll speak about the nuances and how it works. The idea of participatory framework was actually it's a combined notion, and they're applying this participatory framing towards the justice application, and in meaning, in this case, the conceptual framework is that to have those directly impacted involved in the decision makings that 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 relate to the criminal justice field. So that way it's relevant and people understand the process and processes, of the systems. Just a very general looking at it in terms of participatory justice. It's a concept. There's an organization now called Participatory Justice, I think in Seattle, that's doing
Okay.
some work, and they're involved with advocacy, a lot of advocacy and working with women in terms of making sure, trying to fulfill that role, and how directly impacted people can be involved in decision making in these processes.
Okay. One thing you said to me, because let me be clear for the audience. You and I kicked it for, I don't know, probably about an hour and a half, 2 hour
Mhm.
conversation. And I mean, I was, it was so rich. I was taking notes and just going in, right? Because it was so rich. But the one thing you said to me on the phone really stopped me, man. I was like, whoa. And you talked about structural erasure. Explain what you mean by that, because I think many people have lived it without having a name for it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been experiencing structural erasure for quite some time,
Okay.
in different type of examples. When we think about individuals like, and I believe it was George Washington Carver who did some work around peanuts, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that was erased at first. That they didn't want to give him that kind of credit. Or, going back in slavery, where one of our ancestors may have developed the invention, but because they were the property of the master, right? The master got credit for it. That by definition is structural erasure.
Okay.
All right, is when an entity in which a person works for or just a stronger socially in their presence actually takes credit for and like absorbs literally the work that a person does, utilizes it, recognizes his value, recognizes the individual and his contribution, but has the ability to absorb all its originations and produce it as his own, right? And so I've seen that play out in personally. I've seen that play out while I was in prison. There's a lot of things that brothers and sisters were developing in terms of programs while I was on the inside that really caused a movement within the prison population, where individuals felt like this is a program they can get involved with, or this is a program that's truly relevant. And in time, the institution jacked that program. So,
Mm.
for an example, speaking more concretely, back in the early 1980s, and I was telling you about this too as well, back in the early 1980s, during the HIV and AIDS outbreak, right? There were two areas that actually blew up the first with this pandemic in the United States. New York was one of them, San Francisco was the other. The third that followed these was the prison system, and more specifically, the New York State prison system. And because of this, and because of this outbreak, very similar to COVID, people didn't know how to respond. They were afraid. They didn't know. A lot of people were uneducated in terms of transmission, and the response in a lot of institutions, in the prison institutions, was just to isolate the person who was showing symptoms of being HIV affected. They would isolate the person to basically isolate them until they die. And the sisters in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility played a role in contacting outside communities to find out, educate themselves about transmission, about healthcare, about what could they do to support their own sisters inside who was dying. Fast forwarded, they prevented and they changed the whole system. Their influence changed not only how their correctional facility dealt with the matter, it actually changed the way New York State prison system allowed even in men's prisons to develop a program. And these two programs later become known as ACE, the AIDS Counseling and Education, that was in the women's facility, and in the men's facility it became PACE, the Prisoners for AIDS Counseling and HIV Education. And these two programs became a pillar in where it had individuals not even who were HIV infected, but people would say they were affected because maybe their mother passed away or their brother passed away or someone relative. Like everyone had been impacted in our community to some degree or another, either by direct association or someone who we knew. And these
Okay.
programs took off. They were around basically until I think around COVID, where they had
Okay.
to speak to, so where no one could mingle, for people couldn't mingle in classes anymore. And they may still be around to some degree in some facilities in New York State. The point that I'm making is by the time it was actually 2015, let's say, 2017, from 80s until the teens or right before COVID, it was an institutionalized program called PACE and ACE programs. And if you were to look into any of the files in which the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision in New York State, if you look at their data on the development of these programs, nowhere does it say that the people in prison are the ones who initiated it. Nowhere does it acknowledge the women in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in their records. Now, the odd thing about this, brother, is that like we know this history has happened so many times to our people, right? And because there was no documentation on the other side, right? There was the only documentation was the dominant documentation. Well, the difference in this case, there is documentation from the other side. Some of the women wrote a paper that got produced in a law journal back in the 80s talking about their history. Other reporters have come in to follow up on this as an investigation to verify the processing. So on one level, you have a legitimate recognition of the origins of these two programs that is for anyone who does the investigation, they will see. And yet Docs refuses to acknowledge the origination. That is an example of structural erasure.
Okay, and so my follow-up is that how many movements do you think have lost their original architects because institutions adapted the ideas while quietly erasing the people who created them?
I think a number of institutions have done that.
Okay.
And I would say maybe not institutions, initiatives. I think a number
Okay.
of initiatives have been impacted in that kind of way. And sometimes it hasn't always been by structural erasure by the dominant institution. It can be sometimes structural erasure by funding, right? Where people are saying, yo, I like the way this is, but we want to, have this carve out or pay attention more to a specific demographic. And if you were to do this, right? So like, I never want to discount any work that's done for the youth.
Okay.
And yet, when we start talking about other programs that might be applicable to Black men at this time, people, oh, this is a great idea. It would be better if it was for women right now, or if it was for the youth. That's where the money's at. I hear this all the time. Powerful program. And literally, but if but they say these things, they'll pull you to the side. It won't say that in the write-up, or they'll tell you very clear, we're funding initiatives for the youth and for women or whatever demographic you may want to be, the elderly, whatever the case may be. So I think that I think these things have happened in a way where structural erasure has influenced. For an example, more concretely, in New York State, they had a program called AVP, Alternative to Violence Project. AVP was actually developed between a Quaker group and individuals who were from the Green Haven think tank back in the 1970s. Now this is a very peculiar time period because even though it's the Green Haven think tank, what we have in the Green Haven think tank are a lot of men who got transported from Attica after the Attica riots, that they got sent to the Green Haven. And from this Green Haven community, Green Correctional Facility community, they developed this think tank that formulated with AVP to develop, with Quakers to develop this Alternative to Violence project. And what's very specific about this program is that they were very intentional that it was a shared leadership, recognizing that civilians had a certain role, definitely with the administration and whatnot. They weren't trying to buck that, but they were certain also leadership skills that individuals in-house had within their own community. So the idea is how they can work collaboratively and always reinforce the integrity of this collaborative working together, so that even though it wasn't a violence program, there was also a capacity building program to help individuals build a capacity to become facilitators. So it isn't just civilians facilitating, it's people on the inside also facilitating these, right?
Okay.
Now this program, so this program is developed, and yet within its successes, docs felt the need to create a whole new other program, remodel it by this basically on a very similar principle, but in this case, one is recognized as fulfilling your mandatory requirements for taking a violence program, and the other is just, an add-on. And what ends up happening, it undermined the integrity of the add-on, because definitely people who want to take care of their mandatory requirements. You see what I'm saying? And so it undermined the initiative. Prior to that, there was no initiative until people on the inside had created.
Okay. So you've suggested that organizations sometimes embrace community ideas while unintentionally or intentionally disconnecting those ideas from the people who birthed them. How? Let me ask you this. How do we build systems where, essentially innovation is shared without history being erased?
How? Say that again, please.
How do we build systems where innovation is shared without history being erased?
Without how can we build
Innovation.
innovation
Yeah.
without the structural history being erased, like tying it to that last, got you.
Correct.
Yeah, it's important to have the knowledge of what had been erased in order to adequately move forward. And I don't know if that's the response to the question, the way it's framed before I'm hearing it. For an example, I often look at our life journey. Sometimes we're carrying the torch, and we have to hand it off, right? And it's almost like the marathon that goes overnight. We're carrying the torch, and we got to hand it off to the next person who's going to carry it, right? It's one thing to carry that torch. It's another thing to make sure you keep it lit, right? So you running with this torch and this responsibility, but you also have to make sure you get lit. Now, it is possible it goes out. You turn it off, you turn it over to someone, they got a torch that's not lit. They got to stop and find ways to light it, right? Yeah. So the question is, how do we want to hand off the torch to the next group after us? How do we get our torch when we was passed on to us? And then so that history has become oral history we shared amongst each other in large part, right? But we need to have that background information in order to, and that doesn't mean we can't move forward, but we're going to have to stop, pause, and do all that it needs to do to get this thing relit before we take off. Well, if it's lit and we understand its purpose and responsibility, we can keep moving with no problem. We don't miss a step. And so in many ways, I see when we start talking about these initiatives that people have, put in place. For an example, I used a minute ago the AVP and the ART. If no one shares the background of, people talk AVP right now is in places all throughout this country.
Seen it. You're right.
And in some other countries as well. And the people who take the program, they all know that shared history, or they should. It's like it's in their facilitation book. But people outside who only look at it as a violence program, they never even tap into what is like the core strength of the program. What is it that really binds it? What is it that makes it most relevant? And so future generations are able to look at that book and say, wow, this idea was born from us. That means I have the potential. I too can create a think tank and take maybe not redo AVP, but move it forward. Use this model to build something else in a collaborative way. When we don't have those examples, a lot of us feel we don't have the kind of support, that our ancestors didn't do anything, right? How powerful is that, bro? When we start talking about why is it so important for us as Black people to acknowledge that we come from kings and queens and not just slaves, right? Because if we don't have that historical knowledge of what we came from, right, then we're going to rely on someone else to determine our self-definition as slaves.
I totally agree with you, man. I'm gonna shift a little bit to this topic. Every one today, right? They want to say they're trauma informed. You challenge that language and instead use the phrase trauma attentiveness. Why?
Thank you for that. Yeah, this is another part in which I've been trying to pay attention to. And this to me is like an example, is an extension of what Participatory Justice Associates does, right? So whereas participatory justice is trying to get individuals involved in reform, right? And looking at criminal advocacy and ending mass incarceration, Participatory Justice Associates looks at things as a consultancy, looks at the relationships that's being built in some of these practices that are
Okay.
designed to help but are falling short. And so I'm used to, so in my opinion, right? Not saying that they're not doing good work, but are they fulfilling like the full scope of what could potentially be there? And so,
Okay.
for an example, we hear about trauma-informed approaches. Trauma-informed approaches was first introduced as a branding, right, by the Substance Abuse Administration, Mental Health Administrations, SAMHSA. They came out with a booklet, I think 2013, 2014, and they have a structure to it. There's approach to it. And part of it has to deal with safety, 6 principles: safety, transparency, collaboration, institutional relation, like collaborations with the person with peer collaboration, peer support, institutional collaborations, and then cultural, historical, and gender backgrounds, and realizing, for an example, that what we have dealt with as Black people in this country has actually caused a PTSD. Like in
Mm.
SHAMSA, they acknowledge that, right? These are the 6 steps. And yet, when we hear about trauma-informed approaches, oftentimes they're not fulfilling the 6 principles. They're not engaging so much with the cultural, historical perspective of certain things. They're looking at specifically individual trauma. They're looking at what was the trauma that happened with your prison experience and how we can deal with that. And that's important. That is so
Okay.
important. And yet, in discussions that I've had with other directly impacted leaders of organizations, individuals have revealed some concerns with the current practices around trauma-informed approaches. One of them is that they often say people are acting as if prison has been our only source of trauma, when in fact, we've been traumatized by educational systems,
I
by healthcare,
yeah.
by all these other things way before we even you start talking about PTSD. Many individuals struggling with PTSD way before they even got to prison. And so, and yet organizations who contend, and I'm not saying all, this is not a blanket statement, but it is a dominant practice. Organizations that contend to be trauma informed are not really engaging with this long-term or more dynamic application of cultural, gender, and historic application, right?
Okay.
And or they don't adequately create peer support relationships or cross-sectoral types of relationships and supportive individuals. For an example, if a person got something to deal with the law, who's there with social work that's working with lawyers sometimes and working with an individual in a courtroom? Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. Maybe in some places like New York, they might be a little advanced. They got court advocacy. You go to some other places where they have a lot more underserved legal support. They're not getting
Okay.
no type of social work support while they're going to trial or while they're preparing for trial. So there's these areas in which people are saying they're trauma informed, and yet they're not even fulfilling the full package of what a trauma informed practice is.
Okay.
The idea of it being trauma attentive, what I'm talking about is how do we get organizations to start fulfilling those roles? I'm not
Love
saying
it.
they're doing anything wrong, and I think they're in the right position. The thing is, are they adequately serving in the full capacity in which we need it?
Okay.
Right.
You also raised a concern that really made me think, right? And you asked, how do we know whether an organization is actually trauma informed, right? Should there be a measurable standard? Should institutions be held accountable instead of simply using the language? And so that made me think, man. And so I'm asking you, how do we know whether an organization is actually trauma informed?
We don't. Like they have right now, they have the DSM-5, which is the diagnosis,
Mm,
right? They have a standard, but that's only a diagnosis of a person is going to be has PTSD or some other type of anomalies that might affect their ability to function. That's very individualistic. Then you also
Mm-hmm.
have SAMHSA, that I just said a minute ago. We have they have 10 domains and 6 key factors and the 4 R's as well. And yet they have no standard that they put out. And in all actuality, I think is not necessarily a bad thing. I think the
Okay.
standard, because why? I think the standard needs to come from us.
Okay. I agree. I totally agree.
So I think this is where I lean in, and I'm not just complaining about what other institutions are not doing and serving us, because in my mind's eye, that continues to put me in a a service recipient model. I want you to create a better program to serve me. Whereas I think we're in a better situation collectively. Individuals like ourselves. There are a number of individuals who are directly impacted who are today are practicing lawyers, who are
Right.
practicing doctors of social work, who are researchers. I think collectively we can come up with a standard to reinsure that, right? And this is what participatory justice is leaning and working towards.
Okay. Let me shift gears a little bit. You've mentioned what you call gatekeeper syndrome. That's a powerful phrase, right? And what does it look like in practice? And how many good ideas die because someone protects access instead of expanding it?
Yeah, I mean, brother, it's so prevalent. It is so prevalent. It's almost like it is so prevalent, it's invisible. So in some cases, for an example, like right now, some aspects of gatekeeping is institutional, it's structural,
Mm.
right? And it's become so normalized. For an example, law
Yeah.
reviews. An
Yeah.
individual can go online, can find a lot of different information from a lot of different places, and yet go to some law reviews and you need specific institutional access, or you need to be a lawyer, or you got to pay for it. And this is supposed to be free this is supposed to be information so that individuals can better understand and comprehend the law. But really, what it's doing is talking to scholars and it's not geared. It's talking to scholars, practitioners, judges, all the
That is true.
individuals in the field. It's not geared to to to, en- to enhance the education of the community, right? And so that right there is a form of structural erasure. I mean, excuse me,
Okay.
of gatekeeping,
Gatekeeper.
right?
Okay.
There was a brother, and I'm never gonna forget. I called him Stormy Norman. Never forget, he was in my class one time, and this is at Columbia Law School. And one day, after class, he asked me, "Bro, why is it that we don't have access to law libraries until we go to prison?"
Yeah, no,
So,
we've talked about that.
and
I
so,
got some,
when you think
shout
about
out to
that.
Stacy Burnett and those people with
And
J Sword
when
that
you
are
think about
doing that.
that, individuals like we're told ignorance is no excuse for the law, and yet we don't have access to understand the law, only through what they're telling us what it is, right? And I mean, now it has gotten better because of online access and because online workshops, and there's a lot of other people talking about the law in this way where it could be more dynamic. But notice even the language that the law is written in a way that the average person, and I'm not talking about people in prison or people from the hood. The average person with college degrees can't understand what's written in some of these law books.
That's true.
That's a
You're right about
form.
that, bro.
That's a form of gatekeeping and knowledge. And then, of course, I mean, we have individuals who are heads of institutions, heads of organizations, maybe within the middle management level, whereas you may have some insight knowledge, but because they feel maybe you don't have the same institutional or organizational roots that they have, that they are better prepared to present it than you. And this is
Okay,
something
I
that
can
we
see that.
often run across.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, you might have the experience. Yeah, you may have the knowledge. We definitely want to be able to utilize these things for sure. But in terms of understanding how to organize around it, how to best approach it and present it so that it's sustainable, that it meets institutional requirements, all these, evidence based, right?
Yeah.
How many times we hear this is a form of gatekeeping. We hear these terms. Is it evidence based? And then meaning, do you have the capabilities to do the research across a broader spectrum, but they do have the resources to do these research on a broader spectrum. So it becomes a form of gatekeeping.
So if gatekeeper syndrome is the disease, what's the cure? How do organizations move from protecting power to building capacity?
It's a very good question, right? And so I think in some parts it definitely so this is where I believe how participatory justice, or how the word participatory in this sense, has influenced my thinking. It was
Okay.
originally, so a little history around participatory work. There's two different type of schools of thought that I categorize that kind of like been building up participatory work. One is participatory research that's been around for like 40, 50, maybe 60 years as a practice, and then participatory budgeting, a little bit younger, but its roots
That
is a lot more extensive. But the individual who was like considered to be one of the fathers of the thinking of participatory budgeting is Paulo Freire, and he wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, one of the things that he speaks about is the practice of praxis, Praxis, right? And basically for him, praxis, how he has explained it, requires both advocacy and reflection.
I feel you.
And he's
I
saying,
like that.
or reflect. So basically, it's saying is, yeah, we need to, or I should say, reflection and advocacy. So one, we need to be able to know how to reflect on what the in idea and identifying the problem, and then it needs to be followed up with action. He's saying reflection without action is just thought, and yet action without reflection is like basically like how to say just action. There's no moving it forward. It's just reactionary, if you will. And so for him, that process is cyclical. So you need to like you reflect what the problem is, you do an action to resolve, and then you reflect again because
Right.
new things are going to emerge from this process, new insights. When we start talking about capacity building and power building in what you shared, I think one of the components that is necessary is this process, this idea of the cyclical practice of this reflection, action, and then reflecting again. And
Yeah.
then a new act, but also building from those. I think a lot of times what ends up happening is people look at the action and want to just repeat the action, and they run without necessarily thinking about what this action may look like differently, let's say in Detroit where you're at, and then how it looks differently in New York.
Okay.
How does it look differently in the South? Like so and the thing about it is a lot of times when we think about these initiatives or institutions, the things that oppressed us, bro, has not always looked the same everywhere we went. Slavery in Mississippi looked differently than slavery in Washington, D.C. New York City had slaves until the early 1800s, right? It all looked differently. They all had different responsibilities. So sometimes our response, even though we may have initiatives or movements that individuals want to employ, we have to think about the contextual framework that we're in, the land that we're in, the people that we're in, the society that we're in, and how they apply. So it requires this ongoing action and reflection as part of the component. And I think that's a missing element that we don't emphasize enough on.
You made another statement that I wrote down immediately, right? You said we need to create work that carries dignity, not just engagement. What's the difference, my friend, between giving someone a job and giving someone work that restores dignity?
Yeah. I'm going to say this, and you probably heard it 1,000 times, but this is going to have to be maybe in 1,000,000 times, but this is going to be 1,000,001, man.
Okay.
You could feed a person how to fish, or you can teach him how to fish, right? You could feed a person, he lives for one time, he eats for that night, but if you teach him how to fish, he eats for that lifetime. Both fish, both cooking, they're both going to eat, but the dignity is in this individual has the ability to be self-sustaining moving forward for the rest of their life. And a lot of times when we're engaging with individuals, if you notice, a lot of people are being invited to advocacy conversations, panels, right, and discussions, and usually it's the same ones who their funder is associated with. That's typically the role, right? And then after they have them speak, there's no real follow-up after. There's no real partnership after.
Right.
And I'm not saying, again, not a blanket statement. I know there are some very unique organizations that are working to change that they kind of been through it already and say, hey, this is still not enough. Like say for an example, and how this can play out in real time, and using the advocacy thing and going back to this idea of trauma-informed stuff. The idea of telling your story can be very re-traumatizing. And yet individuals are being asked to come support advocacy initiatives to tell their story. And the advocacy organization saying they're trauma-informed. So structurally, to me, there's a conflict. If telling your story can be re-traumatizing, how is it telling it for advocacy is any less re-traumatizing? Now, there is an approach to trauma storytelling. And in those cases, some of the core elements is to be able to be supportive of the individual telling the story, reminding them to stay present, reminding them, like supporting them that they're no longer in that situation. Like it's really a person-centered storytelling approach to the trauma they experience. In advocacy storytelling, and it's very in the trauma-informed storytelling, it's usually very individualistic. You're talking to a therapist, or you're talking to a selective group, like a church group. So it's really, really supportive, right? In advocacy storytelling, you're sitting there talking to a whole audience of people, and you don't know who these people are. You don't know what they're writing notes of what you just said. No one is really coming to support you afterwards to make sure that you're back in the present. So I know a lot of people, and then the best they say is I'm talking about the organization who invites the advocacy organization. They often say, oh, we're here we'll compensate you. And compensation is not a trauma-informed practice. Compensation is critical. Compensation I think is essential when you're going to have directly impacted people speak. 100%, they should be compensated. You could be compensated for your time. You can be compensated for your labor. You can be compensated for your expertise and skillship. You cannot be compensated for your trauma. That's like saying you go into therapy and everything's resolved behind one session. It's not going to happen. So you're talking to a group of people, and supposedly because they pay you, you're going to be less re-traumatized. I've myself, and I've spoken to several other leaders who've been in this situation, and I asked them, did this resolve the issue of being re-traumatized? And overwhelmingly, the answer is no. It doesn't address it at all.
Okay.
And so it's these kind of ways that these institutions or practices kind of like just neglect the dignity of the person. See, it's because it's in that. This is where we lose. So yeah, we have the person speaking. Everyone benefits. The advocacy group benefits. The initiative benefits. Hell, they may even get policy reform change, man. But the individual telling that story, that moment, do they feel dignified, or do they feel they just have to throw themselves on the cross and sacrifice themselves?
You also challenge the way we think about law itself, right? You said criminal law is only one small piece because nearly every part of society is governed by laws. How does that broader understanding change the way we approach justice reform?
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask you a brief question. If we start talking about justice reform, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
When I think of justice reform, I think of individuals, people.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
I think of laws changing.
Okay. What laws? Can you get more specific? What laws?
So to me, I'm more, you know me, I'm a push guy for when they get out. So this whole revocation of your good time or technical violations, we got to change that. So to me, those are the rules, policies, and regulations that have to change.
Okay.
We need to have laws or implementations in place where, okay, if he tested positive, should he go back to prison? If he was out of bounds, should he go back to jail? On the first one? Now, if he's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, that's a little different animal, but not on the first or second one. And when I think about justice reform, I think about, in lieu of incarceration, what can we do here or at this facility or at this environment? Almost in the sense of, let's not lock them up or her. Let's do something differently. And if we change that mindset, that should be the whole mindset moving forward. Instead of incarceration, we're going to go this way.
Okay.
To me, that's justice reform.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And in that space, I'm in total agreement with you. I support
Okay.
everything you just said.
Okay.
The thing is, we're gonna talk about justice is broader than criminal justice. And usually when we talk about justice reform, that's the first thing people go to,
That is true. Which I did. You're right.
right?
Not the entire totality of the whole thing.
There's
Yeah.
economic justice. There's
Yeah.
and not even just
Yeah.
social justice, economic justice. There's
Yeah.
environmental justice. There's health justice, educational, gender, right? And
But
so a lot of times when we start thinking about justice reform, we end up just primarily focusing on the criminal justice, and yet our lives have been informed by all these other experiences. Now, and the reason and why I think this is important to have a discussion, because a lot of times we have justice institutions who want to engage our community in conversations around justice. And yet they want to have these conversations specifically about how to correct or how to better be, a criminal justice environment, right? That's what they want to change. They're discounting the fact that many of us have already developed an opinion of institutions, of justice institutions, based on our treatment on all those other forms of justice. Like, say, for an example, educational justice. We know that our communities have been living in failing schools for intergenerational, like, decades. We know that. And
but
so
I
my thing
think
is, all I'm saying is these my point is that institutional distrust is a very increasing phenomenon in this country. And
major.
it's probably even more so in the Black and brown communities and indigenous communities. There's a lack of distrust towards the institutions that are supposed to be there to help us. And so now when we apply just that general awareness to the law, it's almost like, yeah, you're talking about the law, but we don't even trust that that's going to work fairly for us.
Such a I have a question, but before I'll make a statement, I think, are we getting to the point where society and individuals think that you are responsible for yourself now? Because several programs or several things were already out there back in the day, or were even greater than they were now. And if you didn't come over or you didn't take advantage of that, then shame on you. And how do we combat that? Just think about that. I mean, you don't have to answer that today or right now, but answer it in this other follow-up question I'm about to ask you. Many people talk about check this out. Many people talk about institutionalization, right? What you just talked about, but they only talk about it only in prisons. I only talked about it being institutionalized in prisons, right? But you suggest institutions themselves can become institutionalized in how they think and operate. And so my question to you, my friend Alejo, is, can systems become trapped in habits just like people can?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Hell yeah. I mean, just like you said, just like people can, and people create systems, and people
Uh,
manage systems.
yeah,
So if they
yeah,
become
yeah.
trapped, systems become trapped. The system only, like the computer, the system is only going to operate in terms of how the individual built it.
And what you tell it to do, right?
Yeah.
That's like AI, right? AI is only good as what you tell it to do,
Yeah,
right?
basically. And what it's been programmed to do, That question that you asked a minute ago is something I might just sit with for a little while, But I
Okay.
do
Well,
believe
hey man.
I do believe that I do believe we're at a very interesting moment in history right now, right? Or in present, with all that's going on. And I think this is an opportunity for those of us to reflect as well as being prepared to act. Now, right now, there seems to be a lot of action going on with Trump and all these other things, and immigration and all these other things going on. And yet, if we are not willing to reflect and understand how mass incarceration blossomed and how these policies applied, then we're going to be open for the next iteration of this thing and the expansion of mass incarceration.
It
So
can
now,
come back.
so now going back, right? I'm a 60s baby. I was born in the civil rights, right? Within 20 years, I was a baby of mass incarceration.
Mhm.
You
Me
cannot
too.
tell me the two are not related. I'm sorry. It was almost as if, and we know, and I know, mainstream media, they don't give much conversation to concepts like the COINTELPRO and other programs, but we know that drugs were specifically sent to our communities for the intention to lock us up, to create a whole new process of the new Jim Crow, what we now call the new Jim Crow. We understand that connection.
And can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
It is amazing when I hear people say that, and people say that. Do you honestly think that some people are in the upper chamber, quote unquote, and said, we're going to do it like this so that this becomes the out? Okay. I'm just asking you. I mean, it seems to fall in line, right? Because, let's face it, put drugs in the community, more people get locked up because we're going to have harsher laws. So it's like a table of six, right? And we're all sitting here in the strategic wisdom strategy play because we're it. We're the upper table. And watch this. You allow these drugs to come in. And as you allow these drugs to come in, you on this justice side, lock them up. And you're going to benefit because more prisons and more of this, but it's all one pipeline and all of us are going to eat excessively because of it. Now, I believe that's demonically spiritual, and my faith will tell me that Satan gets into the minds of others with that strategy, and that's what they did. But I mean, do we really think that some people really got into a room and said, that's how we're going to do it, or did it just play out that way? What do you think?
I think it was intentional. I mean, we
Okay,
have evidence. We have
okay.
evidence. We have evidence from the whole Oliver North Iran Contra scandal
That
that points
that is
directly
true.
to it. But
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have CIA intentionally
yeah.
bringing and introducing what the concept of crack was. People were freebasing. Crack and freebase are two different things. Well,
That is true.
those who don't know, freebase was a process to extract cut. You get to its purest form. Whereas crack, the cut is actually compounded. Two different things. It's a cheaper form. And they introduced this new chemical compound because freebase had already been around, but it was for those who had money.
Crack was, if I'm not mistaken, help my ignorance if I don't know, and it's okay. I thought crack was introduced in Latin America, and then they figured it out, and then they brought it here.
That
So
that may that may be
okay,
that may be true. That may be
okay,
true. All I know is that the reports have shown that the CIA brought that thing into South Central Los Angeles and gave it to the brothers in there, specifically the brothers, as opposed to the
mm-hmm,
Mexicans, because they had so much more population power. They knew they didn't want to feed the cartels, so they got a
mm.
smaller group of blacks in
Cartels
South
are,
Central.
and so. Do you think cartels were back then? I mean, you think it was still a name
Oh
cartel back
yeah,
in the
I don't know
'80s?
if it was
And
the name was
I'm ignorant.
the
I'm
same.
ignorant, but yeah,
It might, I don't know if it's applicably the same, but yeah, it was around. I mean, Mexico was very big in terms of heroin coming into the United States in the 70s and the 60s and 70s.
okay.
So the thing is now, my point bringing this up is that in that situation, Oliver North gets tried. Oliver North gets tried, and they asked him about this situation. Did you all bring this here to get? And he admitted, and he
Mhm.
said, why? And he said, I was following orders. Who
Yeah,
told you? I plead the fifth.
can't go that
Okay.
high.
Who's above you? There's only two people above you, vice president and president. There might be three. Let's say it was five. And then he said, who told you? I'm pleading the fifth. Why'd you do it? Because I was following order. What is he telling us, bruh? A group of individuals gave him this order to put this in place. This is on record.
Listen, I totally agree with you. I just think that, not that I think in a negative way, but I think also, think of the young generation, right? They've been told things passed down. It was like this, it was like this. Well, where's the facts of that? Where's the actual evidence? Like, we know slavery is bad, and Harriet Tubman and the great, abolitionists that helped, right?
Sure.
But we got evidence of that. The Frederick Douglasses, we got his writings. We also have writings for the 80s. But when a young person today says, man, they did crack like this, and they can be like, nah, that's just because that's what y'all did and y'all made y'all money or whatever. So why you going to blame and say this? I mean, you get what I'm saying? I'm not
I
trying
mean,
to negate it, but you do understand where the next generation or like my children may say, well, I get it, but was that more of a decision and a choice that you all made that maybe you shouldn't have made, and we wouldn't be in this situation right now?
I mean, that's an extended conversation.
Okay,
That right
okay,
there.
okay,
I think what you're
okay.
saying, that's a legitimate conversation. There's no doubt about that. Individuals still have choices. The thing is, I'm just pointing out that in this case, you asked about, do I believe certain individuals made a decision to try to enact this thing? And yes, I
Yes.
did.
I
Yes,
agree.
I do.
Totally agree.
And
Totally agree.
and you ask, is this part of a natural sequence? I think it's I think it's no, I think it's pseudo. And
Good point.
I'll give
Good
you an
point, my friend.
example. I think it was a pseudo action that caused the response. The response became natural.
That's brilliant.
So
That's
now,
brilliant.
for an example, as we know, the prison industrial complex draws its analogy from the military industrial complex. Now, part of the concept of the military industrial complex is that industry have been interested in certain locations like Vietnam. Like if we create a war in Vietnam, then we have to start creating more weapons, and that would create an economic stimulus for the country. And next thing you know, we're in Vietnam. And this has been documented. The same thing with the first Desert Storm. They create a conflict. Remember Vietnam? Why are we going to Vietnam? You look at that was the question. Why are we even there at that time? Same thing with Desert Storm. Why are we even there? It was a pseudo conflict that created a natural response, and now everyone has to go create industry, go make goods, weaponry, spend. Immigration today, yes, it's an issue, but they created a pseudo conflict. The criminal immigrant pseudo conflict, and we got all this money flooding into it now. So this has been a pattern, not just in regards to prison. This is just one element of it. When we see these plays come out, and the thing about it is, you say earlier about how these things come into place. And I said earlier about it is so common that it becomes invisible. Well, the invisibility in part becomes when people are starting able to get jobs again. So think about it this way. Individuals signing up for immigration patrol because why? They're getting $50,000 off their they're getting their student debt paid for. They're getting an extra $50,000, and the economics, man. People start getting jobs. They could change their whole life in just signing a paper. And
So
all
now-
of a sudden now, the emperor has no clothes, right? He wearing invisible clothes. They see the truth, but they saying, screw that, man. I'm getting paid right now.
So why not? And I'm radical. I mean, so this is why this show is so awesome, because we done went off script and we about to get it in, and it's like, yeah, y'all need to be listening to this. I hope, I'm gonna put a little extra butter on this one to get it out there. But my question, Alejo, is this. So if that's the case, you know what I used to say to the brothers inside? I said, man, we know rap music culture. We know entertainment. We may know fashion to some degree. I mean, Gucci and all them kind of control it, Calvin Klein. They control it, but we know it. What's trending, what's hot. But the one thing we know better than anybody else is this criminal justice system, because we've been the most impacted. Why on God's green earth are we not leaders and taking over and dominating it like we did the rap culture? That whole new genre, that whole new industry. Can we not do that with this? And that's what I used to challenge them in. I used to challenge them, brothers. Man, y'all talking about going to do this, doing that when you get out. Get in this post-release industry, which hasn't been named, but we can become the Googles of information age if we do it right.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, so I understand it's economics, so let's play into that economics and let's build the economics, but with the whole resolve of once we get it, we're going to support ours down here to ensure we got stabilization, right? It's almost like a trick bag where people who got paid on the crack epidemic didn't go back and support the people in the communities, right? And the families. What we're going to do is we're going to take the money and now we got a trick bag for you. Well, some people don't, but the whole idea of it is we're going to take that money that is given from that industry and not go back and support those things that we know matter. That's just, I don't know. What do you think about that? It's kind of off. I may be,
No, I do think
novel. I may be out of the box, but that's just my thinking.
So you may mention, I really like the analogy, and so like I gotta let it be known. Like
Of course.
I'm originally from the Bronx, right?
And I love New Yorkers, man.
and
I've had so many New
grew up-
Yorkers on my show. I love them. I
and
love them.
grew
I
up-
love
I
y'all.
grew up in the South Bronx, right? And so I was there when like hip hop was just music blending in, not even the
You remember that.
MCs, going
You
way
remember that.
back, right? Going into project, playing, not going to clubs, playing in project centers, Soundview Center, Bronx River Center, Bronxdale Center, Monroe, you know.
Oh, wait. Shout out. You remember the Shelter?
The Shelter.
Yeah, in Manhattan, that little club.
Oh, no, I'll probably lie about that. Don't forget, man, I was locked up a long time, man.
Okay, my bad. That was in we used to do the Shelters in the 90s. Okay,
Yeah, I was locked up.
Yeah.
I was locked up
Okay.
all through those nights. Anyway.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, my bad.
Anyway,
I'm just chilling.
I often look back at that, like, in terms of who we were at that moment.
Okay.
And there's a couple
Talk
of
to me.
elements, there's a couple of characteristics I think a lot of times doesn't really get discussed when we start talking about the impact of hip hop. So one, these were a bunch of poor black kids, right? And a lot of us wanted to be able to just go to a party and fucking dance, man. But we couldn't afford to go downtown. We couldn't afford to go other places. So here was this opportunity, this guy just mixing the music, keeping the dance beat up. Before that, it was the record would play, you take it off, you put another record back on, right? That was
right.
So you had your crescendos and your downs. This case, the guy's able to just keep the music, the dance music, the break beats was up there. That was a phenomenal thing. No one was trying to say we're introducing hip hop to the world. People were coming to us because they just wanted to party. So I just want to stop right there. One, we weren't in competition with no one else. We weren't trying to prove ourselves to downtown, to people downtown.
Okay.
We just wanted to do our own damn thing. Like that's something to stand on, right? We're not in competition. We're not trying to prove nothing to no one else because we're making it up as we go along. And we're not trying to be like, you need to accept us. That created something to stand on with autonomy, with independence, right? And it embraced all cultures. Bruh, a lot of times, and this is much as and I'm always going to recognize, the black contribution in hip hop. But if we're able to take and look at the ethnicities of that blackness, you had a lot of Jamaicans that were there, like Jamaicans, maybe first generation.
Wait, in the early days?
Yeah.
Of hip hop?
Man, Cool DJ, Cool Herc, all them, KRS-One, all these dudes, man, was Jamaican, man.
I didn't know that. See, now you put me on game. Now we took it to another level. I didn't know that. I knew that only, wait. The only like islander or person that was not from America that I know, I'm not a hip hop head, right? I'm not a sneakerhead. I'm not that. Yeah. But I grew up with the KRS-Ones and the Rum DMCs. I went to the Fat Boys concerts, because I'm an 80s baby, right? I mean, I grew up in 69. I was born in 69. But let's be honest, bro. They didn't identify with being from another island or another. So the brother that has the Drink Champ show, right? I didn't know he was from another, country. I forgot his name. You know what I'm talking about. The brother does the Drink Champs.
Now, when we were together,
I didn't know.
Check this out. When we were together,
I didn't know none of them cats was from different angles. I mean, different countries. So when you say that, that's like raw.
When we were together, we were together. Wasn't individuals coming there, to now try and say this is a Jamaican thing, taking it over. Like we were all melting. We were literally a melting pot. A lot of the dancers, a lot of other DJs, Puerto Rican. Very strong contribution.
Yeah, like what, DJ Tony Touch?
Yeah, and Crazy Legs.
I know. Yeah,
so now
Kid Capri. Yeah, you're right.
In terms of just going back. And so it was truly it was a true melting pot where everyone had the opportunity to contribute their voice, man. If we start thinking about organizing, looking at some of these principles and standing on, listen, we're not here trying to seek your approval. We're not here trying to say we need to belong with you. We're here to do what we need to do for our people because we know what they want. We're listening to them. When this thinking becomes the prevalent thinking of organizing, then we can go into that space of building power that you're talking. But when we start thinking about it, and again, it's easy to talk about these things. And the baby need to eat, right? We need to pay rent. Like we got bills to pay. And so when these other realities come into place and you got funders that want to say, hey, we'll give you, no, we're not trying to change your thing. They never come in to say, these big radio companies and record companies never come in and say, we're here to take it over. Yo, we want to put you on so that you can give all the people that you know a platform. Then they create a false chief, a false industry president. Real talk.
So do you think that can happen in the restorative justice movement? because we got to change that narrative. Then, like this is our, and that's what I was saying, right? Let's be honest, bro. I was saying this is ours. This is our movement. This is our narrative. This is, I mean, who better to do criminal justice than the people most impacted by it since the day it was created? Us. We need to become the Google of this industry. I don't know how you do that. That's my vision.
I
That's
do
my
think that
hope. But how do we do that?
I do think that there are some gaps or there are some nuances in the reentry space that only we have the capability for fulfilling. I think there are some structural things.
Beautiful.
I think there's some structural things that other institutions should be supportive of us. But in terms of our leadership, I do think there are some individual, very nuanced things. Like I was talking about trauma informed awareness before, right? I
Mhm.
how to in terms of being more attentive. How is it really happening? Right. How was it really reaching the people in relevant ways? So I think the way in which, and and I would love to be wrong on this one, but I think the ways in which you are presenting it, that cat's out the bag. It should have been like
Man,
that.
that's what.
It should have been locked in like that from day one, and that when individuals start thinking about building their own, they needed to be checked. So you have a lot of different
Okay.
false programs that came up, or people who mean well. We want to create our own, and it's now like they got some faith-based organizations in the South that I've ran across, or put it this way, I have people who've engaged with them, and yet they're still very much have engaged with people directly impacted, but still very much carrying the mantle of judgment. You did prison,
That is so
good for
true.
your reentry, that's well good, but did you repent for your crime? And still that it's still that regardless of what you've done, they want to find out other things that you repent for your crime. And I don't know if that I'm not saying that conversation isn't important, but is it that conversation in an advocacy space important?
God, that's so boy. That you know what, man. Okay, so I got to tell you what we got to do because we've been on for a while now, and we got to come back. Okay, let's
Good.
just keep it real. You and I got like a bunch of other questions to go into that we haven't addressed because, like, we was. But that's the think tanking. I said that in the beginning of the show. This is my man, and this is how we gonna do it because he's going to intellectually challenge and stimulate on another level that oftentimes we don't get to have. So, man, the next show I'm looking to bring not just you, maybe, I don't know, next week, two, three other people on who like think that rolling wheel of thought and let's go all in and let's get it in because there's some more questions I definitely want to ask you. And I'm so appreciative to what you did for me and what you've talked about today. And I want to really dig into the culture and how that's shaped restorative justice or the criminal justice system based on the culture of the African American urbanization, right? I mean, let's keep it real. It shaped it, right?
Yeah.
It's shaped. So let's talk about that. And we're going to do next week. I mean, you let me know your dates and schedule, right? And we'll get it early so that we won't have any distractions. But I'm going to bring, one or two other people on. If you know some people that can come on and talk about this, let's push this narrative. And I'm going to pump it out, man, because this is something that I think we need to know, right? Because let's be honest, right? Watch this, watch this. I've heard brothers say, "Man, when I hear that music or that trap music, I'm about to go up in there and get that bag, or I'm about to go up in there and spray." So is that culture, or is that narrative, or is that influence cause that? Or was that already in place and already systematically part of everything? It just needed a stimulus.
Mm.
Man, let's talk about it. I don't think anybody's talked about it. I don't think anybody's ever addressed that from that correlation and from that analysis, from that uh, standard deviation of 1 plus 1, P001 value, right? Because I really do think that there is a similarity, but let's talk about it. So when we talk about implementing change, what does that really look like? I know we can't change music, right? I mean, come on, people get money. But can we at least bring the awareness out there so that now there is a conversation? That's all we're trying to do.
I,
And maybe that conversation leads to other conversations that leads to possibly a thought process being changed, which goes along with, in my faith, transformation of the mind.
Yeah, I'm all on board for it, brother. Right now,
Okay.
I, uh, I appreciate being in a conversation, and that's how I view this
Yeah, man.
conversation. You know, I like to be able to offer a perspective,
And you do. And
and if
it's
that
beautiful.
perspective can, like, trigger thought, once again, not trying to be as accurate in what I wanna talk about, right? And trying to, be as supportive in terms of recognizing what I wanna present, and at the same time, totally open to rethinking some of these things, but it's about putting this perspective out there so we can jumpstart this conversation, right? So this idea of, and I use the word jumpstart in this case because I do think in some of these ways, the thing's already in us. It just needs to get activated again, like a jump
That's
start,
true. That's true. That's
you
true.
know?
And brother, you have been a blessing to me today on this show. And next week, you give me your times. Like I say, earlier the better, right? Monday, Tuesday. But let's go in and let's get it. And if you know some people that have that level of thought that you want to bring on, I'll send the invite to them, and I'll bring a couple people on as well that have, I don't want to say counter thoughts, but thoughts as well, because they grew up in it, the 80s and 90s. And let's talk about it, man, because this is what's missing, right? We have a lot of shows that talk about rehabilitation, reentry, and criminal justice. But man, let's peel back the onion. This is what I've been waiting for. And I knew we was gonna get it with you because you're one of those guys that, I mean, let's face it. I'll come to New York. I'll bring my pipe. I'll smoke my pipe, with my cognac or maybe not. But we'll sit on the deck, enjoy New York,
Yeah.
and we gonna just kick it, man. Like brain explode us, right? Because with thought. And a lot of people don't do that today. And that's what's missing, because that whole collectiveness under love, right? It's not under a discord. All I'm talking about is under love, bro. Love
Yeah.
for you, love for me, where
Wow.
we absolutely share our opinions and not be judged for it. If you feel this way or I feel this way, okay, brother, that's how you feel. You might think that way because of your lived experiences. You feel that way because of your lived experiences. That's fine. I love you regardless. But now, we ain't got to come with a solution today, but let's bring out everything that may have been harbored inside of us for so long, and let's talk about it. So, I can't wait till next week or 2 weeks when we get this on again. But today, I'm going to say it for the record. I am so thankful for having you on my show, my man, brother Alejo. I'm going to get this out soon. I'm going to clip it. I'm going to do it right so people like, whoa, look what's going on. This brother's on a different level. Let's get at him. So tell me, how can we reach you, man, before I go?
Well, as of right now, because I have to update my other social media outlets, but so as of right now, I could be reached at my LinkedIn page, and that
Okay.
is the Participatory Justice Associations,
Okay.
Alejo
I'll put
Rodriguez.
that on there from the captions.
Alejo
Yep.
Rodriguez, yeah, and I'm about to upgrade a couple other things to make some changes myself, and just what's being offered and what we can do. So this is a really good time. I got some other things coming up too. So being engaged, social media on such platforms like yourself is going to be really helpful in terms of things I got going on, like that piece that I wrote that I shared with you.
Oh, I love that. I read that. I was like, yeah, we didn't even get to talk about that, man. That PB and the PAR, your company, and the brother from, where was he from? Brazil.
Yeah,
And like I could tell you right now. Wait. Let me make it clear. I can give that to some conservative people, and they may think that was communistic, right?
yeah.
So we got to talk about that, right? And so I loved it. That was very liberal, very democratic, what he said. So let's talk about that as we move forward, and let's see what we can do together, man,
Yeah, I would
because
love that, man.
that,
That's like an anchor.
yeah,
That's like an anchor of how I view engaging in these relationships with institutions. That
right,
as much as people are saying, "Oh yeah, we can work together," my interest is how are we going to work together?
right.
Where is the dignity, right? And so I believe in this, and it unfolds. There's more to that, but that essentially is it. That
Okay.
essentially is it.
I got you, man. And so whatever I'm doing from a financial point of view to bring you on, I'm already got one thing thinking in my mind, or two, where, eventually I'm gonna bring you on as a consultant or as an adjunct to make sure that you get blessed from it because we'll be blessed from it. That's what we got to do. So
Let's do it,
I'm
bro.
excited, man. Like this year isn't even near over for what God has blessed us to be able to do, and it requires us just being in position. You know what I mean? And so the whole level of faith and Christian walk, people don't get it, is that it ain't about how hard you work and toil because if you believe in Christ, He did all that. So you just got to be in position. And so we're just trying to get ourselves in position to get what is coming, already promised or is coming. And then at the same time, we got to begin the mindset that when I get it or I'm there, I bring Alejo with me for his glory, of course, God's glory, but watch what he does now to the whole aspect of what we try to do, which is essentially destroy the works of the devil, which he has caused while we have such an uproar and such a negativity today. And so, with that in mind, man, I am so thankful for you. I'm so glad you got on my show, and we about
Brother,
to get it in.
brother
We put our
doctor,
time.
but I want to share with you. One, so do you consider Light Switch a faith-based organization?
It's not faith based. It's just my belief, right? My belief has stimulated Life Switch to what it is, but it's not quote unquote a faith based because I don't want to be under that tagline.
Okay.
Because I may have some people that come, who are all 5%ers and they want to do something. If, my thinking is, Lord, I pray about it. God gets the glory and anything we do, then let's go. So it's not quote
But I don't
unquote
know.
faith
I
based.
don't know if I shared this with you, but like I got my master's degree from New York Theological Seminary, right?
Mm, mm.
And it was a
You
master's.
didn't share that.
I was a master's in professional studies,
Okay.
and we studied the foundation of ministry, and
Mm,
so definitely, and so the Bible was a primary text, right?
that's true. Okay.
And so, but in this school, the approach was you didn't have to just be Christian. As long as you were there serving the people, as
That's
long
right.
as you're there serving the people, that is in itself is ministry. So that's one perspective. And I still feel that way. I feel the work I do on the low is ministry, 100%. Right. And I say that because there are some faith-based organizations that may support funding. You never know. So I
Okay.
would, you may not want to eliminate that in totality. The other thing is that I've done my own little research because I'm Muslim, right?
Okay.
And so,
Right.
and so I did my research in the Islam and Christianity and in Judaism, and there's similarities to some verses
That's true. That is
that
definitely true.
speak directly towards the importance of taking care of the wayfarer, taking care of the orphan, taking care of the women. Like there's some very similar texts to the priority given to social justice work when we look at it through the
So
lens
true.
of
So true. So
right?
true. I like
In
that.
in all
I
3 of
like that.
those. In all 3 of
I
those.
like that.
And a lot of times, people are not having that conversation either, because then we can really orientate that into a foundation of how we're thinking about our work in reentry or any other field with criminal justice. So I just wanna just
Right.
share that with you, based perspective at all. The other thing is that, I'm about to go out seeking funding, right? And based on that paper
Okay.
about
That I read. Okay.
about the community law
Yeah.
review. I'm in
Yeah.
collaboration with students from NYU, and there's aspects of it that I envision would involve a podcast as a way to having convers because
You know I got the Second Chance Network, so when you're ready, you just come on our network.
and so the thing is that, if there's other potential funders that you might be aware of, I'm willing to partner.
Ah.
I'm willing to
Okay.
partner. So,
We gotta connect, man.
like I
So
said,
whatever it takes.
the premise is that paper. I have an outline for the proposal. Well, the paper is going to get published in the fall. But in the meantime, if you have any ideas or thoughts, hey, we might be able to do something here, let me
I
know.
do.
And we
I
and
do.
and we might be. I can share the paper and we can have further discussion.
Do. So give me some time and you know me, man. I stand by my words. So
Okay,
I'm here to bless you. So I tell you what we'll do. Let us try next week, week after, but certainly maybe next week. Let's get it together and we'll go from there. Okay?
sounds good.
All right,
Sounds
my
good.
man. Well, hey, this is Dr. Simon signing off. Life Switch Conversations with brother Alejo Rodriguez. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned for part 2. That's coming probably in a week or two. And you'll be able to be blessed by it as I have been blessed interviewing this brother. My man, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
let's do it again soon, man. I
Yes,
got you, man. I'm here for
yes,
you.
let's do it
All right?
again.
Okay, my man. God bless.